So, hi, I'm Lee Suker at Sinch. For those that didn't just see the last session, so I head up Authentication Number Intelligence at Sinch. Sinch is a CPaaS company all about personalising communications at scale, helping enterprises do that. And of course, to achieve that, you need authentication, you need personal data, and you need trust. So, look, what a wonderful few days. Some fantastic talks, some fantastic, technology and ideas presented. It feels like a very tough act to follow. We've talked about user experience, we've talked about security, but as you go about achieving the trust you need to offer these services, there are some dragons. So I know, that identity and authentication, they are critical requirements for any B2C company, and that's kind of my focus, B2C. But these things aren't simple. I created this slide this morning because I knew we'd all be tired, so I felt like I'd have a bit of fun. So where are these dragons that I talk of? Well, it's not them. For those of you who don't know these people, this is Dragon's Den. These are TV show investors that are going to, get you out of your investment crisis. But this has nothing to do with them. So it's not these. Is it these? No, it's not these either. These people we understand. They just want to make money, and we kind of know how they do it. These are way more scary. These are real customers that matter to our business. So I have an interesting stat which kind of puts that into perspective, but kind of let me kind of move on. They don't care about security either, albeit they do for a bit when they get hacked. And then it's a bit like any parents in the audience might sympathise. We forget those first 3 years because it was hell on earth. And it's the same with security. Our houses get burgled, we buy an alarm. 2 years later, can't be bothered arming it. When the neighbour's alarm goes off, you don't visit it. So we just don't care as consumers about security as we should. But we know that we must deliver simple experiences to all of our customers, if you're a B2C enterprise, whilst controlling costs and mitigating risk. And to put this into perspective, I was doing some research online yesterday and was looking at credit card fraud. So by 2030, there's expected to be $80 trillion spent on our credit card. And at the same time, there was roughly $50 billion worth of fraud to be expected. Well, that's 1 cent in every $100 spent. Surely that's an acceptable situation. But if I was to lose 0.5% engagement with that same audience due to a lousy user experience, that's nearly 5 times the economic impact. I can't remember my number now, it worked out to 400 billion in losses due to 0.5% in engagement. So that really amplifies the fact that UX is the dog, right? Security is the tail. And I've got some personal stories with customers that I've been engaged with over the last couple of years at Sinch. One enterprise, a social media company, we were looking at rolling out new authentication technologies. I'll give you a clue, this is where this 0.5% came from for me. There were huge benefits of what they were going to roll out from a security perspective and a cost perspective. But they saw a 0.5% drop in engagement, and they said, this is not for us. That was after a year of testing. Flip side of this, another customer I talked to was rolling out an authenticator technology, 2 of them. I won't name them, but it's the sort of thing where you download an app, brilliant security model, And this was a really important service that they were trying to protect. They got 5% engagement with their users and reluctantly came to Sinch to say, we need SMS OTP because that's the only thing that our audience are really going to engage with. I'm not really going to talk about the details on this slide in a great deal because many of you, if you scan down them, you have a sense of what they are. We know that users are, security gets in the way of doing stuff. We know all of the negative impacts that enterprises face if they get it wrong. And we know we need to find secure solutions that people use. But how do we do that? So I'm going to talk about my framework, which I call R.A.I.S E, as a tool to help enterprises figure out which choices that they should make. So it's a wordy slide, better for kind of reading, offline when you've got time. But I'll give you a sense of what it's about. We all lead very hectic lives, and we also know that stronger security can be very brittle. And I'll give you a sense of that in my own personal experience. I used a U2F key, which is one of these little hardware security tokens. Brilliant model for security. And it was on all my mobile phones, my laptops, and then I moved company. I went from Microsoft, Google, to Apple ecosystems, and everything broke. And I was locked out of all my personal Google stuff for 6 months, not because I didn't know how to reset it, but because I knew it would take time and I was busy. If I'd have asked my wife to take the same security measures to protect her kind of personal life, I wouldn't be here now, I'd be under the patio. Right. So these things are hard, and we should never underestimate that. And another little story I was kind of telling last night, this is something I read from a renowned writer on security. This was a rollout of U2F keys for a big enterprise. And they did a year pilot. After that year pilot, they saw a 70% failure rate. Employees were sticking the USB in the wrong way. They thought it was some kind of fingerprint scanner, and it wasn't. They were losing it and getting locked out, and they decided, actually, this is not going to work for us. Worse, at the end of the trial, the employees were putting the U2F keys in the lost and found box for someone else to use, still with their secure credentials on. And we live in a mobile world where our devices get lost, dropped, down the toilet, broken, or renewed every 2 years. If we link authentication to a physical device, we are asking ourselves to be locked out. So I come on to R.A.I.S E, regular. How regular are you asking your end users to engage with you? That could be authenticate with you, or it could be resetting their credentials. If it's every day, it's likely that you're going to get them to do something special to you. This includes the whole reset process, right? But if it's occasional, or even if the reset process is less than once a year, you're going to have to tap into something that they inherently understand. If not, you're going to get a drop in engagement. Audience, how big is it? What are the demographics? Are there issues around technology, poverty, inclusion, disability, all those things that we've talked about? You're going to need to find either one technology that can reach them all, or you're going to end up with multiple technology stacks. And that's obviously a personal decision for every enterprise, thinking about Alan Mitchell's spectrum of risk that he talked about yesterday. Importance is interesting because it's not what you perceive to be important, it's what your end users perceive to be important. And my little story here, personal, a few weeks ago, was a UK bank decided to turn off SMS OTP. That caused me a huge number of problems. Number one, they didn't enable push on the app. So every time I was spending online, I had to open my phone, find the app amongst 5 pages of apps, go through facial recognition to open the app, go click on alerts, bring up the transaction, click approve, go through another facial, go back to the app. And then when my kids were spending money on Nintendo or whatever it is, or on my wife, it was coming to me. Before, I could have read out an ODP and shouted it upstairs, but that's gone. Okay, so it's importance to the individual and their perceived importance, not the enterprise's view of importance that's important. Sway is interesting. Sway is about how much control you have over that individual. If they're an employee, it's likely that you can encourage them to use an authenticator app or something more secure. Getting an app deployed with notifications and keeping it there is super hard. That's notwithstanding the whole reset process. Okay? If you don't have control, you've got next to no chance. And expertise. This is not only about the expertise of the user. I talked about my wife putting me on the patio if I asked her to use the U2F key. The same is true for a password manager. She likes something like SMS OTP because she doesn't have to think about it. But if that OTP code is delayed, she's now hung up and doing something else. So whatever it does needs to be quick and easy. There's also an expertise issue on the enterprise side of this. All of these new technologies which are more secure are great, but with it comes complexity and opportunities to make mistakes in the deployment. So that means you need a super good tech team to deploy it and maintain its integrity versus something that's super easy to deploy, like SMS. So, I'm not deliberately just calling out SMS OTP. I'm just trying to compare and contrast reach with complexity. So anyway, look, it's not rocket science, R.A.I.S.E, right? I want to leave you with something simple and rememberable so that enterprises can help with make their own judgments. So I will now make a pitch about mobile. We have a secure asset in our mobile devices. It's called the SIM card. It's been securing our communications on mobile for 30 years, and it's trusted by over 900 operators globally, and 5 billion people know how to use it. That has phenomenal value. I mentioned it on Tim's kind of panel earlier. The user experience is super simple, and for most situations, it is secure enough. So, here's a little bit about what I do in my product. We are trying to make it easy for enterprises to leverage that fundamental security which is inherent in the SIM card with some proxy methods. SMS verification has been the king on the internet, the largest MFA technology on the internet today, and highly likely to remain so whilst passwords are so prevalent. But we're trying to make these marginal gains. So we have something called flash call, which uses a zero duration call to help authenticate the end user. The benefits are there's a mild uplift in security, but some considerable cost savings. But nothing's for free. It's harder to deploy, much harder to deploy. Phone call verification, interesting because you shouldn't have SMS OTP without a voice call option as well, where a robot reads the code. That's kind of obvious for inclusion and kind of disability. Data verification is what we call it. Some of you mentioned earlier, Number Verify. This is a super interesting investment from the mobile operators where they're using the mobile data channel as a potential substitute for SMS OTP. Fantastic in that it gets rid of the social engineering risk of the OTP code. You have to be an approved provider in the chain, which gets rid of some of the kind of integrity risks of sending messages over unknown paths. But of course, again, nothing's for free here either. You've got to be on a mobile data session. You need to be able to switch from Wi-Fi to mobile data in order for this to work. So that restricts you to apps. But it is seamless and it's super fast. So what this does, it opens up a different market, a bigger market, to use the SIM card for authentication. All of this supported by what we were talking on the last panel, by call forward and SIM swap to help increase the overall level of assurance. Okay, so some takeaways. Tim, you stole my last one from the panel. Passwords, they're not going away. My opinion, they're here for at least another 10 years, at least. So we need MFA to accompany passwords. Device authentication, FIDO, fantastic technology. Problem, it's fixed to the device. We lose the device. We go through an onboarding process. We upgrade our device. We have to go through another onboarding process again. So in my opinion, it's too fragile. I think SMS OTP will be the king of MFA for some years to come. And as sure as eggs is eggs, bad things will always happen. New methods will get hacked. Criminals will get rich. I am concerned that when bad things happen, there isn't enough protection for individuals. I think I mentioned this earlier, they can't go to the police. Police don't know what to do. There isn't enough laws to kind of protect them. I've given some examples of that earlier. But I'm still hopeful. I think we can achieve, this secure data logistics at scale that we've talked about. That gives us utility, not friction, but we also have to make the most of what we have today. And that's kind of my job at Sinch and our aims with this product. I want to help enterprises prevent fraud, and I want to help them protect their end users from account takeover. So I think that was my last slide, Tim.
All right, thank you so much.
I'm scared to use this question then.
I think you'll be all right, mate. So,
I've got nothing flashing.
I'm going to ask a kind of industry Met-specific question, because we had Sham on earlier from Infobit. A frenemy, I would imagine, of Sinch is a good way of putting it. So I was asking him about the Infobit. I mistakenly called it an A2P company. He then told me it was a CPaaS company. Same thing with Sinch.
Yep.
But now you're sort of moving on to even another stage of helping M&Os to be in the identity space.
Yep.
So I'd like to ask you how that's going, but also I'm old enough to remember when MEF was a mobile entertainment forum, and what they were trying to do was bridge the gap between mobile companies and entertainment companies.
Yeah.
And of course, mobile companies at the time were all trying to launch music services, movie services, and none of it ever happened because mobile companies are good at core business.
Yeah.
So do you believe that mobile companies can exploit this opportunity to provide identity providers? I know at the moment they kind of are through one-time passwords.
Yeah.
But can they go to that next level?
Yeah, okay. So I think it would be fair to say that companies like Sinch have accidentally found themselves in the identity business, and that's just been through the success of SMS OTP. In that picture I had on the screen is us trying to achieve some marginal gains, to use that phrase I mentioned earlier. But I think a Sinch strategy is, let's focus on things that we can be world class at. If we can't be in the top 3 in the world, then we're probably not going to do it. And there's an awful lot of investment capital going into identity and going into security. And some of my competitors do position themselves as a security company. I do chuckle a little bit because the R&D spend of a proper security company is 4 times more than the annual budget of some of these CPaaS companies claiming to be in the identity and security space. But, our mission is let's help mobile operators where they have world-class data and get that in the hands of enterprises.
You talked about passwords having 10 years left.
Yep.
How long have SMS one-time passwords got? Because it's such an important part of the market. I've written a few articles and I've tried to research what proportion of A2P texts are one-time passwords, and I think 40%. I might be making that number up, but it's a massive business. So it's kind of, you're looking beyond it for the next generation, but at the same time, it's a huge cash cow for a company like Sinch.
No, it is, and that number's not far off.
Right.
So a big part of my job, of course, is to defend and protect that revenue stream, and I don't do that glibly. I'm quite comfortable to talk about, the vulnerabilities, but also keen that the industry talks about them in a realistic way. And by that, I mean 2 things. The first is that we announce how we're mitigating various vulnerabilities, and Tim was alluding to that on its panel. But also to talk about the vulnerabilities of other methods which are not on the telco rails, and in the frame that nothing is secure, will any of these alternative technologies give us a measurable improvement in security? For me, that question remains totally unanswered because there's nothing to defend against a targeted attack.
What's the sense of, when you're talking to enterprises, of concern about any flaws in SMS one-time passwords? Because it's SIM swap, isn't it? Is the big issue. It's terrible if you're the victim of it, but it's one-time passwords are still pretty good for most people, aren't they?
Yeah, I think there's been some misrepresentation of SIM swap. I see some countries are more than others. I saw one vendor of SIM swap talking about a SIM swap epidemic, which I found ironic because we were 2 months into a lockdown, and there was no way that SIM swap had the level of infection, for want of a better phrase, that coronavirus did. So there is some misreporting going on in this space, but of course there's also no doubt that it helps banks save money.
Hey, Lee, real quick on that, just to interrupt. There is a way to protect yourself against SIM swap, and that's putting a puck passcode on your SIM. Can you explain that to people?
Well, yes, you can put a passcode on your SIM, but that really doesn't protect you when a new SIM arrives at the criminal's door, because there's no passcode on that new SIM. So the threat vector is really social engineering. You encourage the mobile operator to send you a brand new SIM card, but it's not Tim on holiday in the Bahamas. It's me pretending to be Tim on holiday in the Bahamas, and I get his SIM card and Brady's bank account. Nice.
Wouldn't be that nice.
But SIM swap APIs give you a date and timestamp of the last time a SIM card was associated with a telephone number, and that's super helpful. Tells you it's a real SIM as well, and not some virtual number.
And to talk money, what are the SMS one-time passwords have been a good revenue raiser for this corner of the business that we're all in. What about this next generation? Are the business models similar, and what kind of revenues are possible?
So I don't think the business model is similar, but it does depend on what sort of company you are. I think if we were to try and find what the average enterprise would spend on security, we'd probably get to certainly less than 2% of the entire budget, probably 1%. Of course, it's going to differ. And they have a lot to cover, not just authentication. If I am a social media company with 50 million users times 250 countries logging in every day, if I did OTP business model for them, I would eat their entire revenue. So we do need to find alternative techniques which are lower cost. I have a view of that in my portfolio, which I call flash call. But there will need to be other kind of device, PKI, cloud authenticators required to support those models ultimately.
Well, I think WhatsApp is experimenting with flash calling, isn't it? So
I couldn't possibly comment.
Can you explain about how flash calling works?
Absolutely.
How it changes the models.
So I hinted up there, it's a zero duration call. And we have a very large pool of numbers, several million numbers. And when an authentication request is requested by the enterprise, we select one of those numbers from random, call the individual, their app hangs up the call, goes to the missed call registry, picks out the last 6 digits of the A number and uses that in lieu of the OTP payload.
And it's a lot cheaper to
it can be a lot cheaper. The biggest cost in that is managing that big pool of numbers, and then obviously they need to be selected at random. There are some risks associated with that, right? So, but certainly no more than SMS OTP. You could argue that there's a little less risk because the OTP code, whilst it exists in a flash call, it's less in the psyche of the user as a code which can be socially engineered and handed over.
Can you do it in iOS?
Classic question. Yes, but the user experience sucks.
Right.
Android apps are the only place where you can really make flash call work well. And of course, that makes it harder to deploy because you've got to write an app.
Isn't it cannibalizing a lot of your revenue?
Again, that's a question I get a lot. And the answer is we are not seeing that. And that, in part, is because we are focused on this kind of low ARPU, high engagement customer with this service that would never be able to afford SMS OTP. But my business asks me that internally almost every other week.
I think we've got a few more minutes before we kind of wrap this up. So anyone got any questions for Lee?
I know your business is asking you about it, but what about the operators?
Yeah, absolutely. They're asking me about it and they're frustrated about it. And some believe it has to be cannibalization. Those that want to listen, and I tell them a story about these low ARPU, high engagement enterprises, they then get it. The next question for them is there enough revenue in it for us to be bothered about monetizing it? Because the operators could deliver a higher quality of service working together with someone like Sinch for Flash Call. Some are actively working with us on that. Some aren't bothered. But there's the third group is those that are convinced it's cannibalization. And if they're convinced, it doesn't matter how many times I tell them it's not.
Anyone else?
Because what I would say is I come from a background on signaling firewalls, and most signaling firewall vendors are being engaged in trying to block.
Absolutely. Some try to block, some can't be bothered. Some, when they try, realise they can't. And the thing to remember here is that this is a opted-in service that the end user knows about that's giving them some value. So any decision to block is about commercials. Sinch has been working with the MEF and the GSMA on Flash Call to build best practice, help promote understanding, but not to say that we have to block this because the MNO is not getting the same level of revenue compared to SMS OTP. 'Cause, that hints of an antitrust issue, right?
Okay, question from Danny. Yeah.
Lee, hi, thank you very much. Do you think the telecoms industry needs to really put together a more focused working group to potentially also lobby the European Data Protection, the European General Data Protection Board, and internally to really say we need the authority from GDPR, etc., to allow the use of telecoms traffic data for fraud prevention? I mean, it needs effectively, the industry is getting there, but we probably need to really be above the parapet, in my view, and be more proactive. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yes, I think there's two answers to that. There's the sorts of services that the operators provide today, SIM swap and all that kind of stuff. But I also think there's some really exciting data associated with metadata about telecoms activity. And if we could harness that in a better way, I think there's a lot of money to be made. So yeah, I think absolutely.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Well, I think that's just about time. So thank you so much, Lee, for explaining everything so clearly. We kind of got onto the enterprise communications crossing over with identity there, which is great because that's what Met's all about. So it was a good session. So thanks for that.
Thanks for listening.